Hey guys, welcome back to more Ripe Stories videos. In today's Reddit story, my HOA president thought she could find me, stalk my house and even force her way inside for an inspection, but when she walked into my kitchen and saw my badge sitting on the counter, her entire attitude changed instantly. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one is titled Grandpa Gated Community Revenge. So this is not my petty revenge story, but actually my grandpa's. About 15 or more years ago, my grandpa retired and moved to a gated community a couple of blocks from a decent-sized lake. Their house was near Lake Athens in Texas, and my grandpa absolutely loves to get out of the house and fish. So retiring close to a lake was an absolute godsend for him. I remember going out on the lake and fishing with him multiple times growing up. He had a trekker boat that he would tow with his old 80-ish Chevy truck. Now, just so you know, this was not his daily driver. He used it strictly for towing his boat, and when not in use, he would park it in a little alcove a few feet away from his driveway, surrounded by trees. Appearance-wise, his truck was not beautiful and had definitely seen better days, but it was still more than capable of taking his boat to and from the lake with no problems at all. Fast forward a few months, and he receives a letter from his next-door neighbor. It turns out they hate seeing his old truck despite it being pretty well covered by trees and believe it ruins their enjoyment of looking outside their house. In the letter they have stated that they have contacted the HOA multiple times with the goal of either fining him until he sells his truck or removes it completely from their view. My grandpa was pissed. He called his HOA to discuss the letter, and it turns out the HOA has shut down all of the neighbors' complaints, but they are persistent and keep sending more. Now, here comes the revenge. My grandpa then asks if there would be any repercussions from chopping down a few trees on his property, the trees that oh so kept his Chevy moderately hidden from his pesky neighbors' peeping eyes. Well, he gets the all clear and begins chopping away. His old beat-up Chevy that was once covered ever so carefully by the trees was now displayed bare in its entirety for the whole world to see. Needless to say, the Grinches next door were not happy to see his truck uncensored. Truck NSFW, so to say. From what I remember, they tried to complain again before deciding to move away. You must have a pretty pathetic life if the sight of someone's old truck is enough to make you pack up and leave. And yeah guys, it really seems like a lot of these HOA people just have too much time on their hands. That once again shows if you have too much free time, it can be a disadvantage as well. Well anyways, the next one is titled HOA Karen broke into my house for inspection, unaware that I'm a police officer. So I've been an officer for about 8 years now. It is a stressful job, mostly night shifts in my case, dealing with the worst days of people's lives. Because of the nature of my work, I'm incredibly private about what I do for a living. I don't have thin blue line bumper stickers, and I definitely don't tell my neighbors that I'm a cop. As far as anyone in my neighborhood knew, I was working a generic job with odd hours. About 2 years ago, I bought my first house. It is a nice single-family home out in the county suburbs, about a 30-minute commute from the city where I work. I specifically bought out in the county to get away from the city hustle and bustle. We knew the neighborhood had an HOA when we bought the house, and I read through the rules before signing, and they seem pretty standard. Keep your grass cut, don't paint your house neon pink, no junk cars on the lawn, standard stuff really that keeps property values up, and I figured it would not be an issue. For context, I'm a quiet guy, I keep my property clean and I just want to be left alone. Enter Karen. Karen was a woman in her late 50s who treated her position as HOA president like she was the supreme commander of a small, heavily armed nation. She did not work, which meant she had 24 hours a day to patrol the neighborhood in her golf cart, armed with a clipboard and an iPad. For the first 6 months I managed to avoid her, but then the petty citations started. It started actually with my trash cans. Because I usually work night shifts, I put my cans out on Tuesday evening before my shift and I pull them in on Wednesday afternoon when I wake up. Karen sent me a formal warning letter stating that trash cans must be retrieved by 8 AM on collection day. I ignored it, and then came the grass citation. She claimed my grass was exceeding the maximum allowable height of 3.5 inches, and I literally went out with a tape measure and it was 2.5 inches. One afternoon I was in my driveway changing the oil in my truck and Karen rolled up in her golf cart practically vibrating with excitement. "Excuse me," she barked, not bothering to introduce herself. "You cannot do mechanical work in the driveway. It is an eyesore and a violation of Section 4, Paragraph B of the bylaws." I wiped my hands on a rag, looked at her and said, "I'm doing routine maintenance here, which takes like 20 minutes. The bylaws only state no long-term mechanical overhauls or storing disabled vehicles." "It is an eyesore," she snapped. "I'm the HOA president and I determine what constitutes an eyesore. If that truck is not in the garage in 5 minutes, I'm fining you $50. "Well, send the fine in the mail," I said calmly, turning back to my truck. "I'll appeal it with the board." She huffed, muttered something about disrespectful millennials, and sped off. I thought that was the end of it, but I had inadvertently painted a massive target on my back. By refusing to bow down to her authority, I became her white whale. Over the next few months, the harassment escalated. She cited me for having a non-approved shade of mulch, it was standard brown, and she cited me for parking my own car in my own driveway at a crooked angle. I fought every single one of these fines in writing. I never yelled, I never threatened, I just sent cold factual emails to the HOA management company citing the exact bylaws, meanwhile proving her wrong. I was grey-rocking her and it drove her absolutely insane. But then came the catalyst. I decided to replace the flooring in my kitchen and living room. I hired a contractor, they brought in some materials and over the course of a week they did the work. It was entirely internal, no exterior modifications, no structural changes. According to the bylaws, internal cosmetic changes do not require HOA approval. Karen, however, saw the contractor's van, and a few days after the work was finished, I received a certified letter in the mail. It was a formal demand from Karen on behalf of the HOA for an interior architectural inspection. She claimed that because I had contractors on site, she had reasonable suspicion that I was making unapproved structural changes to the home, and she demanded access to my house the following Tuesday at 10 a.m. to inspect the premises. I sat down at my computer, drafted a very short, very clear email to Karen and the entire board. The email read like this: "To the HOA board, I am in receipt of the demand for an interior inspection. This request is denied. The bylaws grant the HOA zero authority over the interior of privately owned single-family homes. The work performed was cosmetic flooring replacement, which does not require approval. Don't contact me regarding this matter again. Also, any attempt to enter my property will be treated as trespassing." I hit send, went to work and forgot about it, and I assumed even someone as delusional as Karen would know better than to push it. Well, I was wrong. The following Tuesday, I had just come off a brutal 14-hour overnight shift and we had dealt with a multi-car pileup, a domestic dispute and a foot chase, and I was physically and mentally drained. I got home around 8:30 a.m. and I walked into my kitchen, unclipped my heavy-duty belt, complete with my sidearm, taser and radio, and took off my uniform jacket and tossed my leather wallet onto the kitchen island. The wallet was flipped open, clearly displaying my silver police badge and ID card. I was too tired to even carry my gear upstairs. I just wanted a glass of water and some sleep. I grabbed a water bottle from the fridge and sat down on the living room sofa, which is just out of sight from the front door but has a clear view of the kitchen. I closed my eyes, planning to rest for just a minute before heading up to bed. About an hour later, I was jolted awake by a sound. It was click-clack. It was the distinct sound of a key turning in my front door deadbolt, and my heart spiked. My training instantly kicked in. I was wide awake, adrenaline flooding my system. I silently slipped off the sofa and stood out of sight in the living room listening. The front door opened and I heard footsteps on the hardwood floor. "Hello?" A voice called out in a sing-song, incredibly arrogant tone. "HOA inspection. I know you are at work, so I'm letting myself in." It was Karen. I was stunned. How the hell did she get a key? But then it hit me. When I bought the house, the realtor mentioned that the previous owner, an elderly man in his 80s, had a medical lockbox, a Knox box, installed on the side door for paramedics in case he fell. I had meant to remove it but hadn't gotten around to it yet. Karen, being the neighborhood tyrant, must have retained the emergency access code from when the old man lived here. I stayed perfectly still and watched from the shadows as Karen strolled into my kitchen. She did not look like a woman conducting official business, she looked like a kid in a candy store. She had her iPad out and was actively taking pictures of my new floors, my cabinets, and my appliances. "Unapproved trim," she muttered to herself, snapping a photo. I stepped out from the living room. "What the hell are you doing in my house, Karen?" I asked. My voice was not loud, but it was the deep, authoritative tone I use on the street when things are going south. Karen actually jumped, nearly dropping her iPad. She spun around, clutching her chest. When she saw me standing there in my uniform undershirt and tactical pants, her shock quickly morphed into indignant rage. "You're supposed to be at work," she yelled, as if my schedule was the issue here. "I asked you a question, Karen," I said, taking a step forward. "How did you get into my house?" She puffed up her chest, trying to regain her authority. "I used the emergency lockbox. The previous owner had it installed for medical emergencies, and as HOA president, I retained the access code for community safety. Since you refused my lawful request for an inspection, I had no choice but to conduct a surprise audit. I have probable cause to believe you made illegal modifications." "Probable cause?" I repeated, almost amused by her use of the legal term. "Karen, you are an HOA president, not a judge. You broke into my home." "It is not breaking and entering if I'm conducting official community business," she screeched, waving the iPad at me. "And it's a good thing I did. You did not submit any permits for this flooring. I'm fining you $500 and I'm calling the cops to have you removed while I finish my inspection." "You're calling the police?" I asked. "Yes. They will arrest you for interfering with an HOA official." She aggressively marched towards the kitchen island to set her iPad down so she could pull out her phone, and that is when she saw it. Sitting right there on the counter, illuminated by the morning sun pouring through the kitchen window, was my heavy-duty belt with my service weapon. Next to it was my uniform jacket with the city police patches, and right in the center was my leather wallet flipped open to display my police badge. Karen stopped dead in her tracks, the color drained from her face so fast I thought she was gonna pass out. Her eyes darted from the badge to the gun to my tactical pants and finally up to my face. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. You're a police officer?" she stammered, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "I am," I said calmly. "And by the way, Karen, you just committed burglary. This is a break-in, Karen." No, she started backing away, her hands up in a placating gesture. "This is a misunderstanding. I'm the HOA president. We have rules." "The HOA bylaws do not supersede state law, Karen. You used a retained code to access a medical lockbox without any permission and entered my private home and began photographing the interior. That's a felony." I reached over, picked up my cell phone from the counter and dialed 911. Karen started legit hyperventilating. "You cannot do this to me," she yelled, the panic now fully setting in. "I'm the president. I own this neighborhood. You cannot arrest me." "I'm not arresting you," I said, keeping my eyes locked on hers. "I'm off duty and this is out of my jurisdiction, so I'm calling the county sheriff." I gave the 911 dispatcher my address, identified myself as an off-duty city officer, and reported a burglary in progress with the subject still on scene. I requested a priority response, and when I hung up, Karen made a break for the front door. "If you step foot outside that door, you are fleeing the scene of a crime and I will physically detain you," I warned her. "Sit down at the table and don't move." She collapsed into one of my dining chairs and burst into tears. She spent the next 10 minutes alternating between sobbing and threatening to sue me and demanding that I show her some respect. I didn't say a single word, I just stood there arms crossed watching her world crumble. Later, 2 county sheriff cruisers came flying up my driveway. Because I work for the city department and live out in the county, the responding officers were local sheriff deputies. That means I didn't know them personally, but they were incredibly professional. I opened the front door and let them in. I quickly flashed my credentials, explained the situation, and pointed to the medical lockbox on the doorframe. The deputies walked into the kitchen. Karen immediately sprang up, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Arrest him!" she wailed. "He's impersonating an officer. He's a logistics coordinator. He threatened me with a gun." The lead deputy looked at my duty belt on the counter, looked at my badge, and then looked at Karen. "Ma'am, did you enter this home without the homeowner's permission?" "I'm the HOA president," she screamed. "I have the right." "That's a yes," the deputy said. He pulled out his handcuffs. "Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back. You are under arrest for trespassing and breaking and entering." Watching Karen get handcuffed in my kitchen was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. She fought them too. She went dead weight, screaming about her rights, yelling that she was gonna have their badges, and demanding to speak to the mayor. They had to practically carry her out to the cruiser in front of half the neighborhood, who had come out to see what the commotion was about. The fallout, though, was absolute nuclear devastation for Karen. I pressed full charges, and during the investigation the sheriff's detectives seized her iPad and iPhone, and what they found blew the case wide open. It turned out that my house was not the first one she had broken into. Karen had been using old lockbox codes, spare keys, and even an unlocked back window to sneak into at least 6 other homes in the neighborhood, while the owners were at work. She had hundreds of photos of people's private interior closets, bathrooms, messy kitchens, which she was hoarding to build cases against them for HOA fines. The neighborhood went ballistic. An emergency HOA meeting was called. Karen was unanimously stripped of her presidency and removed from the board. Legally, she was charged with multiple counts of burglary, trespassing, and stalking. Because she had no prior record, she didn't get prison time, but she was hit with massive fines, probation, and a court order forbidding her from acting in any official capacity in any community organization anymore. On top of the criminal charges, 3 of the neighbors she had spied on filed massive civil suits against her for invasion of privacy. The legal fees and settlements financially ruined her. And yeah guys, now for my own opinion about this story. To be honest, the scariest part of this story is that this Karen got away with this in at least 6 other houses before then finally getting caught. I mean, this really makes you wonder how many other HOA tyrants are doing similar stuff and just haven't been caught yet. Like, how many people have had their homes violated and don't even know about it? Seriously, if I would be living in an HOA, I would be changing all my locks now. And if I ever buy a house with an HOA, the first thing I do is checking for any emergency access systems the previous owner installed. This is just nightmare fuel. And now a comment from Reddit. This person said, "Honestly, you showed more restraint than most people would have. This Karen literally broke into your house while you were sleeping after being explicitly told no. That is not an HOA overreach, that is a legitimate crime. People saying you should have just asked her to leave are kind of missing the point. She had been terrorizing you for months with fake violations and had apparently broken into 6 other homes. So this was not about ego, this was about stopping someone who was clearly escalating dangerous behavior. What if she had done this to someone who was armed and didn't have your training? She could have gotten herself killed easily." And yeah guys, let me know in the comments what you think about this story. Do you agree with the Reddit comment or not? I'm very curious about what you have to say. And the next one is a fantastic petty revenge story, which is titled "Block the Road. We will block you in your house." So for context, our neighbors across the street from us are very loud and very obnoxious. The guy and his wife have about 4 kids and we are pretty sure he's a drug dealer or something, as they are always causing some sort of trouble, which ends up with arguments or fighting in the middle of the road with people asking for money from him or saying he owes them things. One argument even led to his van being set on fire at 3 AM. Sounds like a lovely neighborhood, by the way. So recently we've been having roadworks for electrical issues along our road, and they had just finished the side of the street where we lived. As the workmen were coming to pack away their barriers and gear, one of obnoxious neighbor's friends showed up in their big white van. Both him and all his friends seem to have big white vans and always park on the wrong side of the road for hours at a time next to each other to talk, blocking either half or all the road off. As the barriers were all along one side of the road, traffic was only able to get down the opposite side, so he had essentially blocked off the only access down this road, which the workmen needed to move their trucks. They stayed sat there for a good half hour, not moving for the workmen even though they were asked to, but finally moved along a while later. The day after, work was due to start on the opposite side of the road, which was their side. As you can probably tell from the title, the workmen put up barriers all down that side of the street and divided off his house from the road, as well as putting a barrier right in front of his gate, so there was no way for him to get in or out of the house. They all seemed pretty pleased with themselves. An obnoxious neighbor was super annoyed and ended up having to park his van a street away from his house. Not super exciting, but it was fun for me to watch the events from my window. And yeah guys, now let's read another malicious compliance story. This one is titled "Enjoy the Challenge." So for context, I was working as a cook 2 summers ago in a remote hotel which offered its workers a room to stay because commuting was not feasible. Mid-season, my boss left and a new boss came in from outside the company. Let's call him Idiot. Idiot fired almost everyone within the first fortnight. He kept like 3 people in the kitchen, himself included, for 70 rooms plus events and such. I was basically the only one left who knew how to do a breakfast company style, but he wanted changes. "Hey Idiot, would you like me to explain you in detail how I've been prepping and serving breakfast so you can tell what to change?" "Keep doing them as usual. I will chew you out if necessary." So he did tell me not to prep so much as I'd been doing. Breakfasts are done on the fly. Prep is for spineless cooks. You will know if you ever get to be as experienced as I am. So when the hotel was full, I almost could not keep up. It was both buffet and menu. Enjoy the challenge was his answer when I told him about it. On top of that, I had to do extra work to help him and the other cooks with desserts and such because we were so understaffed. So basically, my shifts were approximately 12 to 13 hours each for the last month I worked there. The moment I saw my rota for the next month, 15 days doing breakfast nonstop, 1 day off and then 10 more working days, I gave him my resignation notice. They owed me days off, so my resignation meant they had to let me go on my 12th day, the day before a wedding and a fully booked hotel. This boss begged me to stay, to extend my stay as a personal favor to him, but I told him no. But it gets even better here. I prepped as instructed, so the next morning, just before I left, I went into the kitchen to get a coffee and he came to me to complain about my prep while literally running through the kitchen to keep up. So I could remind him his rules were to try and do everything on the fly, no matter if the hotel is empty or full, and you have so much more experience than me, it should be easy, right? And yeah guys, I gotta say, this saying, "I will chew you out if necessary" as a response to an employee is one of the most toxic things I've ever heard about. That's worse than kitchen nightmares, to be honest. Either way, thank you so much for watching. I will see you again tomorrow.